straggle. Straggler's gonna straggle. That's cool. So great. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining in my I say monthly. Hi, Aurora, how are you?
I didn't want to disturb.
You're not disturbing. You could never disturb. I would say this is my monthly class, but we didn't have one last month because of Pesach. Or earlier last month, right? Because of course it was Pesach in March, because that makes sense. Nothing makes sense anymore. So it kind of fits. But yeah, this month we're back on, which is really exciting, and doing more money, more problems, question mark at the end. Because I think for a lot of religions, especially a lot of the ones that many of us are familiar with or were raised in communities of, like nearby, have pretty well-known views on wealth. That Christians have a very well-known view of wealth, though I would say it's a little bit complicated, because on the one hand you get, it's harder for a rich man to pass, or harder for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle and for a rich man to enter heaven. You have that saying, but also at the same time, you have prosperity gospel and Joel Osteen, and if you believe and you have faith and whatever, then you will be prosperous. So that's an interesting little dichotomy they got going on over there. You've got Buddhism, you've got the idea that, wealth, that possessions are going to have a negative impact on your life, and what you do to get rid of these things, these extraneous things to your life. I think the Muslim view is pretty much like the Jewish view. It's not really worth going into that specifically right now, because we're going to cover a lot of the Jewish view. But the Jewish view is, I think, as in all things, interesting and complicated, and doesn't follow, I would say, an exactly straight line. And I'm excited to look over that with you. So I'm going to share screen so you can see the lovely text. It's very exciting. Sure. Oh, no, this one. Sound? Nope. Now it's not pretty. Like, I know they've been pretty for so long, but Canva hates me currently, and I don't know why. So we're just going to have to deal with it. It's fine. As we go, if you have, I'll ask for questions as we kind of go along, and I can only see a few of you on the side at one time. So I would say, like, either raise your hand or unmute when I'm asked for questions and just kind of jump in. So I want to start at the beginning, which I think is a very good place to start, with the Tanakh, specifically first with the Torah, and specifically first with the book of Genesis, because in Genesis we see our patriarchs, specifically the patriarchs, not the matriarchs. In ancient times up through pretty much modern times, women couldn't actually own property. So that idea of women having wealth was immaterial, but men could own wealth. And so what was the relationship between our patriarchs, wealth, and God? Well, here we go. We have Abraham. We have told by his servant Eliezer in this particular vignette, I am Abraham's servant, Eliezer said. This is the first text at the top. Adonai has greatly blessed my master, and he has become great. God has given him sheep and cattle, silver and gold, manservants and maidservants, camels and donkeys. So what is the greatness with which Adonai, God, has blessed Abraham? What is it? What's the stuff? What's the wealth? You can just unmute yourself. We're all grown up here.
Well, they're material things: the sheep, cattle, silver, gold, servants. But material goods.
Yeah, these are material goods. And it's interesting to me that is it that God has gifted them to Abraham? Is it that Abraham worked hard and thus got these things? But how did Abraham come by these things?
That's the part that freaks me out, or I notice first, is that, to me, the tone is God blessed Abraham, and all this wealth didn't come by Abraham's efforts or any special brightness he has, or what family he was in. He owes all of his wealth to one source, and that is God.
And that is God. And the English translation here is directly from the Hebrew, which is it's berach, it's blessed. God blessed Abraham, and thus he has become great. You see this gadal, this verb comes up many, many times with yada, 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 yada. Look at Isaac. Isaac sowed in that land. So Isaac's working and reaped 100-fold the same year. Adonai blessed him, and the man grew richer and richer until he was very wealthy, and he acquired flocks and herds and a large household, so that the Philistines envied him. So what do we see coming up here? How did he come by this wealth?
He worked, he sowed the land.
He sowed the land, and
he was blessed.
And he was blessed. So it's a combination through his own efforts, and also God, ups the ante on him. And I think it's interesting because it's not just the line could have cut off there, but it doesn't. It goes on to add, and the Philistines envied him. So now, because the Torah itself, and we really see when it comes to the patriarchs, is, I would say, pretty neutral in terms of wealth. It's not, this is a good or a bad thing per se. It's that God blessed them. God loved these men. They were the patriarchs. They were special to God. And the Philistines, we see now, we have the quality of envy in addition to wealth. We look at Jacob. Jacob grew exceedingly. This is from when I didn't put the whole thing in because space and time, but when, Jacob had, he gets the scoop because he knows the animal, I suppose. And if you have a certain kind of stick and you have your goats drink from that water that has a stick in that water, then you make lots of goats in a certain color. And so he has that deal with Lavan of who gets which goats, and Jacob kind of connives his way, or is just very, very smart with animal husbandry, and he gets lots and lots of goats, and those goats become more goats, and then more goats and more goats. So Jacob grew exceedingly, as the text tells us, and he came to own large flocks, maidservants and manservants, camels and donkeys. So we see a lot of that language echoing from his grandfather. And similar to his father, he worked really hard. He did work really hard, and he got this wealth by way of this knowledge that he had that was endowed to him by God. So we see from our patriarchs, wealth is inherently neutral, I would say, though it comes by way of God's blessing. God blesses these men and they become wealthy. So we start to make that connection early in Genesis. We're going to see this evolve in the Torah, not just from the Torah to the rabbis. Usually that's my track. Torah, rabbis. Here, the Torah itself evolves in this language towards wealth. So here we have wealth is something that God blesses you with. Thoughts on patriarchs before we move on? Yes, please.
Rabbi, is it really neutral? Is wealth really neutral? Because it seems like it's not neutral.
Tell me.
Well, I keep thinking about the story of Job, where he loses everything, and then everyone around him, all his friends, keep saying he must have committed some sin, must have done something.
Yes. Job, way later. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying we have to look at this as an evolution of wealth. If the original idea, I think that the original idea is that, God loves these guys, so they're blessed. Then we start to make this connection that if you're a really good person, you have wealth. And the inverse of that must be, if you do something wrong, you don't have wealth.
Yes.
And that idea, that dichotomy, I think, makes our text pitted against itself. And it's interesting to see how that plays out. But hold on to that, because that's Job, and that's way, way, way later. And we're still very, very early on. Leviticus. Again, we're moving real slow through the Torah. That was all Genesis. Leviticus. So you might think, the wealthy must be people who've done good things. God loves the wealthy because they've been blessed. That's how they got wealthy. And the poor must have done something wrong, so must not be good people, because then otherwise God would have blessed them. Well, because Leviticus says, you shall not render an unfair decision. Do not show favor to the poor or deference to the rich. Judge your kinsmen fairly. So Leviticus is saying maybe that's what the lesson you learned from Genesis. And in Exodus, we see those are people stories, mamash, for real people stories. But Leviticus is giving us laws for everybody to live by. And here we have, don't favor the poor or the rich. So there is nothing inherently right or good, because you were talking about rendering decisions, judgments, rulings, verdicts. Don't favor one or the other. Look at people regardless of their wealth, because wealth is not an indicator of good or bad in terms of quality. But I think it's interesting that this comes up all the way in Leviticus. Wait till you get to Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy is giving us rules. Now you might think Deuteronomy is a rehashing of Leviticus, and in a way it is, but it also adds stuff because Deuteronomy is looking forward as well. We're seeing that the end is near. Moses is seeing the end is near. God's seeing the end is near, and that's really going to start our transition to Jewish peoplehood as a state. So the Jews really want a king. The Jews complain, we want a king on a king. God says, you really don't want a king. Like, no, we really want a king to rule us, because they really, really don't want a king. It's a bad idea. Like, no, we really do. But God's like, fine, have a king, but there's going to be rules. First of all, God, it has to be one of your own. You can't have foreign king, yada, yada. And then we have this rule. Because now we have not just wealth coming into the conversation, but also power. Moreover, he, this king, always, obviously, a man, he shall not keep many horses. Interesting, horses, okay. Or send people back to Egypt to add to his horses. Apparently, Egypt was a hot spot of horse breeding. Since Adonai has warned you, you must not go back that way again. Let's do see that admonition much, much earlier next. You must, and he shall not have many wives, lest his heart go astray, nor shall he amass silver and gold to excess. So what are you drawing out? What are you all drawing out of this? Because this is specifically talking about kings.
Moderation.
Like what?
But the higher that your throne, the harder you fall.
The further you have to go, yeah.
So there has to be balance.
It's interesting. It's like you really need to pay attention to balance when you have that high position. It's like if you have that level of power, it's almost like the Torah. And again, we're really early. This is Torah. This is Deuteronomy, but it's still Torah, very early. And we're seeing the Torah saying, if you have power and you add wealth to that, that could be dangerous. That could be bad. So it's not like all of you need to be careful about amassing so much silver and gold and having too many wives. It doesn't say that. It says you're kings. Someone who's in a position of power. And if you add wealth and power together, it could happen that they abuse their power using their wealth. And that's a concern. Power and wealth coming together, a concern that the Torah has. Deuteronomy has a lot of stuff. Just in case you thought that Deuteronomy was only talking to people in positions of power, you might think, okay, well, that's great. Maybe there's people in positions of power. That's wonderful. Fine, sucks for them. But no. And this is Hazinu. So this is really Moses' last words. This is the end. This is the end. You don't even really ever read this portion unless you happen to be in shul very few times in the year. Yeshurun, Beth Yeshurun. Yeshurun, Yeshurun are names for the people of Israel, Israelites, the Jews. And so we see during Moses' last words to the Israelites, really, this is just, it's a beautiful poem. Hazinu really is a poem. It's gorgeous to read as a text. And it says, so Yeshurun, but Moses is mad because you can see down the line, it's not going to go well for the Israelites. So Yeshurun grew large and big and kicked. And you, Jews, you grew large and gross and coarse. You forsook the God of creation and spurned the rock of support. Yes? I feel like someone unmuted to say something. Or maybe just unmuted. That's okay. You see now, it isn't just the concern about people with power amassing wealth and not making good decisions because of that, but because there's people, the Israelites. God's saying, God is saying, and Moses is saying, Moses is very sad, looking forward into the future and seeing you're gonna just, like the term they use for grew large and kicked was it's just kind of like a grotesque, overly much. You're gonna have so much, and it's gonna make you coarse, and you're gonna forget the God of creation who created you, and the rock of support, your support, and you're gonna spurn all of these things. And especially if you connect with the idea that where does wealth come from? Where does our material support come from? It comes really from our ultimate source of support, which is God. But you're going to forget all of that. Moses is sad looking into the future, saying you're going to forget all that because you're going to get so big, you don't care anymore. It's long. I'm sorry, it's tiny. This is earlier in Deuteronomy, but there is no earlier or late in Torah, so keep that in mind. This is a very beautiful section. Really, Deuteronomy is just pleading with the Israelite people, the Jews. You're going to go forward. You're not going to have me and Moses. So please, please, please remember these things that are really important. Take care lest you forget Adonai your God and fail to keep God's commandments, rules, and laws, which I enjoin upon you today. When you have eaten your fill, have built fine houses to live in, and your herds and flocks have multiplied, and your silver and gold have increased, and everything you own is prospered. Beware lest your heart grow haughty and you forget Adonai your God, who freed you from the land of Egypt, the house of bondage, who led you through the great and terrible wilderness with its serpents and scorpions, a parched land with no water in it, who brought forth water for you from the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna, which your ancestors had never known, in order to test you by hardships, only to benefit you in the end. And you say to yourselves, my own power and might of my own hand have won this wealth for me? Remember that it is Adonai your God who gives you the power to get wealth and fulfillment of the covenant that God made on oath with your ancestors, as is still the case. Powerful statement. I think so, at least. As this last plea to the Israelites, taking the whole Torah into consideration. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were wealthy men. They were wealthy men in a nomadic time where obtaining that level of wealth was really unusual, but they did it, and they did because God blessed them. And now here at the very end of the Torah, so to speak, the end, Moses, God, is saying, just keep the Torah, keep the faith, the laws that are meant to make you a good person and to help you to do good in the world, which is your only real job. Don't for a second get to thinking that you managed to do everything in your life on your own, because you did it through God, which could be a complicated statement. Thoughts on this Deuteronomy? I think it's the last Deuteronomy until we move into a Nach.
Is this also a comment, do you think, on how we tend to just in general forget when we're in need, we're striving, we seem to be more godly and more and more we strive more, but when we're sated, we don't strive. I mean, is this a reflection of that?
Oh. Like we try harder, and when we're trying is when we are we're good and godly when we're actually trying.
Right,
And
when there's something missing, or when there's still when it feels like we're still on a trajectory towards acquiring or reaching a goal, but when we reach our goals, there's something that happens to us and we're not quite so, quite in the same space.
I think that's a really interesting take. I think probably you're right. It sounds good to me, to be honest. It sounds pretty accurate. That's when you're trying. Yeah, please.
I think it also reflects the idea of tzedakah,
Yeah, go on. Say more.
So the more you earn, the more you have to give back. And that's where God steps in and said, don't forget me. And me representing the people. So I think, I think everything's about balance. So the more you earn, the more you have to remember where you came from and help those that are more in need. And
this is almost like saying, don't, because your instinct might be to do the opposite. Oh, I have. And since I have it, and to go on that line of thinking, as opposed to remembering, no, as you have, so must you keep giving. You guys are getting way ahead of me. So I pulled some quotes from Nach, from both the prophets and the Ketuvim, the writings, just because, not because there aren't a lot, there are a lot, but they're a little bit repetitive. So I wanted to get you just a little taste of the different things that the prophets had to say. And because of the prophets, they're very eloquent and not very nice. You would not want to be yelled at by these guys. So first we have Amos, 8th century, saying, and he's yelling at the Jews, as is his job as a prophet. Hear this word, you cows of Bashan on the hills of Samaria, who defraud the poor, who rob the needy, who say to your husbands, bring and let us carouse. So a few things I think interesting going on here. One, talking to, it seems like he's talking to women, because saying, who say to your husbands, And there was no gay marriage back then, so I'm pretty sure he was not talking to any dudes. And calling them cows. So there's that going on in there. There's a lot of things in there. And also keep in mind, like when you're if you think of like the Jews and God as being married to each other, God's a man naturally, and the people of Israel are always kind of like envisioned as women. So that's not, I don't think he was like literally only talking to women. I think he was talking to the people of Israel as like the bride of God, who is naturally a man. Anyway, but kind of touching on things that Rena said and Anna has said, he's yelling at people saying like, you Jews, you're defrauding the poor, you're robbing the needy, and what do you want to do? You want to go like carouse. You want to go have fun, have a party, do things you shouldn't be doing. So that line of defrauding the poor, robbing the needy, hold on to that as we go. We have Isaiah, 7th to 8th century BC, maybe 9th, 8th, 9th. It depends which Isaiah we're talking about, because there might have been two, probably were two. Isaiah yelling at the people, as is his job, for God. And I will bring this charge. What charge? At the elders and the officers of God's people. It is you who have ravaged the vineyard which was robbed from the poor is in your houses. How dare you crush my people and grind the faces of the poor, says Adonai, Lord of hosts. Adonai Tzebaoth. So, I mean, just looking at all the different prophets now, the evolution, look at the evolution. We have Genesis. Okay, but then we have Leviticus, then we have Deuteronomy, now we have the prophets, and you have people like Isaiah saying that, yelling at, again, and we have power working here, not just yelling at everybody, yelling at the elders and the officers, saying, you ravaged the vineyard. What's in your houses, that is which was robbed from the poor. So it's the idea, it's not that wealth is bad, and if you're wealthy, you're bad. It's that, how did you come by your wealth? How did you make your millions? And Isaiah is saying here, it's, you got wealthy by defrauding the poor. So that's a play on the Amos, but you're just coming up in Isaiah as well. You made your money by taking it fraudulently from other people. How dare you, God says by way of Isaiah, how dare you crush my people and grind the faces of the poor? Not that wealth is inherently bad, but how do you come by your wealth is extremely important to the prophets.
Mhm.
Next, we have more prophets. So that's the prophets. Proverbs. Well, Proverbs is hard to date because it's honestly from a lot of different sources. But this probably was late 8th, just because it's the 23rd chapter in Proverbs. And there's great things in Psalms too. I don't think I included any of them because timing. Maybe I have one. I don't remember. Do not toil to gain wealth. Have the sense to desist, Proverbs says. You see it, then it is gone. It grows wings and flies away like an eagle heavenward. It's very pretty because it's Proverbs, and everything in Proverbs is pretty much pretty. Thoughts about Proverbs? I don't want to always just put words in everyone's minds and mouths. I feel like y'all have good thoughts too.
I think wealth is great, but it could also be a trap.
Yeah, how?
I think it might speak to that it's, if you're so afraid of losing your wealth, it could really hinder your ability to live.
Have the sense to desist.
Yeah, have the sense to desist. You can spend all your days making sure you don't lose your wealth. And then that's kind of a prison in and of itself. Yeah.
What do you see about the nature of wealth? Because I think this is a comment also on the nature of wealth.
In what way?
Because what is the it? You see it and then it is gone.
Well, it's transitory.
Wealth is transitory?
That's what it seems to say, yeah.
It grows wings and it flies away. Not negatively, I don't think. It's like an eagle heavenward. So I don't, there's no wasted words in Proverbs. I don't think it's inherently a negative thing, but it's transitory, like Daniel said.
Well, I was focusing on that middle sentence. You see it, then it is gone.
And then that really, I think, grinds the point in. You see it and then away it goes.
It's a tool. It's a tool to get a job done. I mean, that's the way I say it. Yeah, sorry.
Clearly you're correct because your dog agrees. I
Clearly.
think everyone here is pretty much dog fans anyway, so I think you're good. I booted my dog from the room, he's been scratching. But yeah, so then that is almost like saying that it's supposed to be transitory. It's supposed to, like, you have it, it comes into your possession, and then what are you going to do with it? It moves on. Oh, I just really messed up the spacing on this. That's really unfortunate. Okay, I'm mad at myself. Anyway, more blank. This is a very pretty. Did I really mess it up? Annoying. Okay, well, good. Luckily for you, I've memorized it. This Mishnah Pirkei Avot, so it was compiled, not written, compiled around 200 approximately. And whenever people say comments like, oh, I don't know about women, having like women do things, and I always say more maidservants, more lewdness, but it's really just going to be kind of like a little picture about it. But more maidservants, more lewdness comes from this part of Pirkei Avot, which is very famous, I would say. And it's very interesting as literature, linguistic, like just looking at the words. So we have the more flesh, the more worms, the more property, the more anxiety, the more wives, the more witchcraft, the more maidservants, the more lewdness. I don't know whose lewdness you're talking about. The more manservants, the more theft. I think that one's more obvious. The more Torah, the more life. The more sitting, when they say sitting, they mean sitting around, unless it's otherwise specified, sitting and learning, around, great rabbis and learning, like what you all are doing right now. And it makes me a scholar, which is not true. The more wisdom, the more counsel, the more understanding, the more counsel, the more understanding, the more charity, the more peace. So we have like the more, these things that are, I think, clearly negatively weighted. And we have the more things that are positively weighted. So it's not that more is a bad thing. More itself is not a bad thing, but what is it a more of? And to continue that language of acquisition, the Mishnah in our book continues and says, if one acquires, again, language of acquisition, acquires a good name, they've acquired something for themselves. If one acquires for themselves knowledge of Torah, it continues on, they have acquired for themselves life in Olam Haba, the world to come. So we have this really interesting juxtaposition of, more flesh, more worms, and more property, more anxiety, and more maidservants, more lewdness, more. But there's a downside to the more. But then there's also more Torah, more life. What's the difference between these two lists? Is my question.
The use of the possessions versus knowledge.
Possessions, knowledge, yeah, for sure. For sure. I think it's interesting that when they talk about the what do you acquire? When you acquire knowledge of Torah, you acquire life in the world to come. Very lofty. They're big in the idea of what comes next. More so than the Torah ever. No, Torah doesn't care at all. And if you acquire a good name, that is something for yourself. That is the possession par excellence. The possession par excellence for the rabbis. A good name. So it's not actually a thing at all, but it's your reputation. Like if you have a good name, reputation, you are known positively by the community. You are thought of well. So thus you must be a good person. That's the thing you want. That's the thing that you want, the rabbis are saying in the Mishnah.
Is the first, I'm sorry.
No, go on. I just really I'm still mad at myself now. Continue.
If at first read, I'm not sure what they mean, the more flesh, but the list there isn't just property, any kind of material property, but it's focusing on almost owning people, to having control over other people's lives that are serving things that you might be better off doing yourself. It's a specific kind of property. Am I reading that too much into that?
I don't know. These are all flesh. I mean, it's basar, so you might think that means like a steak, and that's not incorrect, but I think that it's a stand-in for just things, stuff and things, specifically of like the food variety and property. But these are all things that as a man, you're talking to men, that as a man, you own, like you have ownership over food. So that's things that, you know, exist and then they're consumed, so they don't exist. Property, which is a movable possession. I mean, it's an immovable possession. It's property. You will that to your children. Wives, something you possess. Maidservants, manservants, something you possess. So it is, I think, very heavily weighted towards people, but all things that fairly as a man in ancient times you owned, which included people, even your wife. Good times. Oh, I'm really annoyed about the conjugation here. Okay, getting over it. So, fine. You're not supposed to, more isn't necessarily, I'm not saying don't own these things. It doesn't say like don't own any, don't have a wife, don't have servants, don't have, just saying, but the more you have, the more problems you're gonna have. That's what they're saying. Don't have any servants, but the more you have, the more lewdness and theft. Don't have any wives, but the more wives you have, the more witchcraft. So true. So don't own any property, but the more property you have, the more anxiety you're gonna have, et cetera, et cetera. So fine, you're allowed to own things. You're allowed to have property. You have to take care of your family. Fair. So what should you be doing to do that? Like how does that get divided up? We have, the rabbis in the Talmud had an idea of what jobs. If you have to have a job, do you have to have a job? And if so, what should that job be? Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says there is no trade that disappears from the world. All the bold is translation, literal translation. Everything that's not bold in the Talmud stuff is Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz of blessed memory. Zichron Levrachai recently passed away, and that's a detriment to the entire Jewish world. His own interpretation and explanation, I didn't put it in because I agree with it necessarily, but most of the time I do. You can feel free to disagree with it because, again, it's not a translation. He's offering his own interpretation and his knowledge of the entire Talmud. So what he says is often colored by the fact that he knows what happens everywhere else. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says there is no trade that disappears from the world since all occupations are needed. But fortunate is the one who sees their parents in an elevated trade. Woe is the one who sees parents in a lowly trade and then follows them into their trade. Okay, so all jobs are good jobs, apparently, according to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who's the great redactor in the Mishnah. So he gets to be titled Rabbi Yehuda the Prince. It's a good title. But clearly there are elevated trades and there are lowly trades. And it's better for, I guess, children to see their parents in elevated trades. Wonder what those elevated trades are. Well, funny, you should ask. Similarly, it is impossible for the world to continue without a perfumer and without a tanner. Fortunate is the one whose trade is as a perfumer, and woe is the one whose trade is as a tanner and works with materials that have a foul smell. So, the rabbis are saying, yes, there's jobs that are better to have, and there's jobs that are worse to have. So say the rabbis. And, people, we got to have both. We got to have perfume, we got to have tan, skins in the world. But it's probably better to be a perfumer. And they draw a comparison, a really helpful comparison. Likewise, it's impossible for the world to exist without males and without females. Yet fortunate is the one whose children are males, and woe is the one whose children are females. So similar to the previous example, they're saying you need all kinds, you need all kinds of workers, but there's better work and then there's like less better work. The same, the rabbis are saying, just like the world, we need males and females, but obviously everyone would prefer males. Obviously. Thoughts before we move on to more things about tanners?
Rabbi,
Please.
may we go back to the last screen? I'm really offended.
This one?
I'm really offended
Oh no.
by the middle paragraph and the last paragraph.
Okay.
I'll take the middle paragraph first because he's making a judgment. He doesn't like tanners. Well, maybe he doesn't like to wear leather clothing. I mean, what's wrong with leather clothing? Not all jobs are sweet. Some jobs involve digging ditches, which are dirty, stinking jobs. And other jobs are perhaps being rabbis, like he is, and which are nice and clean and you never get your hands dirty. I don't like that judgmental approach because it seems to me he's saying, what I like is good But what I don't like is bad. Whoa.
Right.
Okay.
Whoa.
And let me take the last paragraph, which is really offensive, partially because I have a lovely wife and also I have 5 granddaughters. I cannot tell you how offensive that is to me. Woe is one whose children are females. And I'm not saying this because the majority of people here are female. I'm saying it because thank God for mommies and grandmommies and females who have kept our tradition alive and taught the kids. I mean, but for their insistence that kids study at home, go to Cheder, go to Hebrew school, we would not have, I believe, Judaism to the extent we have it now. So his writing to me gives a provincial and biased view of what goodness is all about. And so that's how I feel.
Thank you. No, thank you for sharing. It brings up like 2 really interesting points. We'll address the second one first, because yes, I think many of us can agree that the ancient rabbis did not have any real idea of what all women contributed. So for them, like, oh no, it's a girl. Oh no. But for them, that would have been just the end of the world, because they didn't see the value in women the way, you do and I do, and a lot of us nowadays do, thank God. And the first thing you said, it was about how you wouldn't be the first one to accuse the ancient rabbis who wrote, the Talmud of being elitist. They definitely show a preference for their own jobs. And I'd say for any kind of job that wasn't manual labor, anything that you end up doing with your hands, they use the idea of the tanner. That comes up a lot. They use it as like kind of like the example of a terrible job that no one wants to live near a tanner. They bring up the tanner a lot. Actually, here, I'll show you again. The one at the top. Sorry, all my pagination's off. Rav says to Rav Kahana, this is related to what you were saying, Richard. It's better for one to turn over a carcass than to turn over his word, i.e. break his promise. Skin a carcass in the market and take payment, but do not say, I'm a priest or I'm a great man, and this matter disgusts me. So every once in a while, because the rabbis use this example of the tanner, someone who skins carcasses, as doing this horrible job, no one wants to do it. It's a terrible, you do it because you need money, but it's not a good job, and it's not worth it. But then you do have Rav, who comes and is arguing with Rav Kahana. This is in Psachim, so it's not even the same section of Talmud. So it says that don't ever say that, oh, I'm a priest or I'm a great man and I couldn't possibly be a tanner. This is disgusting to me. He says, no, like you do your job and you get paid for doing good work. And that's more important than saying, oh, that job is below me. But you're right. I think the majority of the rabbis do kind of take that point of view of, ugh. And actually, we're gonna keep harping on your point. Actually, that's really interesting. Let's move on because that's really good. Hold on to that. Rabbi Meir says a person should always teach. This comes right after. Also, just sorry, by the way, I'm being a terrible teacher today. This part of Kiddushin we just read with that, like you shouldn't be a tanner, you be a perfumer, and da da da. That's Kiddushin 82a. Moving on, Kiddushin 82a is this part. This comes next. Rabbi Meir says a person should teach his son a clean and easy trade. And he should request compassion from the one to whom wealth and property belong, as poverty does not come from a trade, nor does wealth come from a trade. Rather, they come from the one to whom wealth belongs. As it is stated, mine is the silver and mine is the gold, quotes Chagai, which is really interesting. So later, as the sugya moves on, Rabbi Meir says, well, you should teach your son a clean trade and an easy trade. And ultimately, I know, a job like they have, like being a rabbi. And so we have that idea, so that on one hand, and at the same time, also this, poverty, like whether you work or whether you're poor or whether you're rich, the rabbis are saying, ultimately, all the wealth is from God. And so that's really the final arbiter of how much you have. It does not matter what you do for a job or how hard you work, it comes from God. Thoughts? thoughts before we move on? And positive pagination is terrible. After all of that, Rabbi Nehorai says, I set aside all the trades in the world and I teach my son only Torah, as all other trades serve one only in the days of his youth when he has enough strength to work, but in the days of his old age, behold, he is left to lie in hunger. So Rabbi Nehorai says that no one should, best thing to do, what he does with his son is he doesn't want him to work at all. Doesn't want him to work, doesn't want him to earn a living, doesn't want to earn money, because the only thing you really need to work for is Torah, he says, because that serves you when you're older. This comes after all of that stuff that we saw. The arguing, the back and forth of what kind of job is better than this job, and should you have a job, and how do you acquire wealth, yada, yada, yada. And Rabbi Nehorai says, like, well, I actually don't think, you should be working a job to acquire wealth at all. You should only be studying Torah. And the Talmud's response to that is disagreeing with that statement. It goes on and says, the Torah, that's the worst pagination, I apologize. The Torah serves you when you're young and when you're old. It's an interesting rebuttal because it's not commenting on the whole aspect of working and wealth. It's saying, well, you should study Torah all the time. And that doesn't mean don't work. It means you should always just study Torah, not to the exclusion of working. That's the rebuttal that the Talmud gives to Rabbi Nehorai about working. Please.
Rabbi, what are their authority? I don't see them.
What do you mean?
Well, they're not citing authority. They're making statements about what's best, but what are they basing their statements on? Their declarations of what's best.
What's the name? Anecdotal evidence. Rabbi Nehorai is saying, this is what I did with my son. Some of them do cite sources. We do see that, who to whom wealth belongs, mine is silver, mine is gold. That's Haggai, which is like a really random minor prophet quote. I think he was really digging for it. I'm not saying I disagree, but I'm saying he's really digging for it. What kind of trade is better? What's the better way to earn your living? It's their own. I'm not quoting Torah.
They're not quoting Torah, no.
No.
It
So
does
assuming
have a certain entitled tone.
Mhm.
Yeah.
They're male and they're male. So, what else authority do they need?
And they're
Just, of course.
I don't know, white collar workers. I don't know how to say that they're not. Most of the rabbis didn't. Some of the rabbis did work with their hands, were vintners or, but very few of them were artisans and worked with their hands. Mostly they were rabbis, which is not like rabbis today where we're leading services and we're doing the B'nai Mitzvah and teaching little kids and all this stuff. They were, I would say they're doing important work. I like the rabbis, but they had a certain point of view, as you all have very correctly sussed out. So what do you do with this wealth? The rabbis say, you have wealth. The rule of 1/5. Rabbi Ula said in Usha, the sages instituted that one who dispenses his money to charity should not dispense more than 1/5. So okay, pause, that means 1/5, that's 20%. Now we know tithing should be around 10%. So the idea is that you tithe, you give away 10% of your income, but not more than 1/5. And that opinion, I'm back in the text, is also taught in a Braita. One who scatters should not scatter more than 1/5, lest he render himself destitute and need the help of other people. And then they go on to say that there was somebody who actually did that. That's their proof text.
Rabbi,
So now
could you
yes,
go
please.
back to the last screen, please, about only studying the Torah?
Yeah, I think this one.
Here it is. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. I teach my son only Torah. Rabbi Gamliel in Pirkei Avot, I'm looking for it right now. I can't find it, but we talked about it the other day.
Yeah, which one?
in a different setting.
Sure.
Rabbi Gamliel said that one who only studies Torah is living a bad life, but one who has an occupation and studies Torah is living the good life. And the wisdom of that is so good because he points out that when you have an occupation, it gives you very little time, and study Torah, it gives you very little time to do bad things. Number one, I know. But secondly, it gives you a better outlook on what the Torah really means. So when I read what Rabbi Nehorai has to say, I have to put him in a lower category to, I think it's Rabbi Gamliel. Correct me if I'm wrong.
You're right.
Okay, so when we see that, I think at least in my view, we need to put this in a category with the last rabbi who said he doesn't like women and throw all the female babies into the ditch. And,
No, like don't see their female babies into a ditch.
well, that's what he's saying is that woe to females.
I mean, yeah, kind of one thought could lead to the other action. Yeah, no, yeah. So Richard really correctly hit on the fact that the rabbis are very at odds with each other because obviously they value Torah learning, and some of them value Torah learning to the exclusion of working a trade and earning money. But you see a lot of the rabbis, especially Rabbi Gamliel, really teaches this lesson, says that you need to, the ideal, and I think you do see that come up here in the Kiddushin in 82a, that it's about, oh God, we're running out of time. It's about both. That you need to learn Torah because that's what's going to sustain you throughout your life, not just when you're older, but throughout your life. And you need to work a trade because it gives you a correct perspective on life and living and human beings. And because the rabbis also think, and this comes up later, and I took it out for timing, not that it's helped me, which is that the more time you have on your hands, the more likely you are to get into trouble. And they say, idleness is, they talk about like, what if you have a lot of money and you have maid servants and manservants to do all these things? What if your wife has a bunch of servants so she doesn't have to work? They're like, she should still find some work to do. They literally, I took it out because I didn't have time, but they literally say, well, even if you have a lot of servants to do all your work, you should still find some work to do because it'll keep you out of trouble, which I think is kind of funny.
Yeah, in fact, Rabbi Meir taught, I'm just looking at it right now, if you're idle in the study of Torah, many idle things will distract you. But if you toil in the study of Torah, God has a rich reward in store for you. I like that.
Yeah. What I love is that we have a lot of different rabbis with a lot of different opinions, and we can learn. I think we learn something from all of them. When you get into, so assuming you do have wealth and you have something to give, because I know like Anna's talked about this and Rena's talked about this. So what are you doing with it? And who are you helping with it? Because we saw like this 1/5 rule. You give away 1/5 of what you got. No more than one, minimum 10%, maximum 20%. Okay, that's what the rabbis are saying. Okay, so what are you going to do with that? In Gittin 61a, we see in the Talmud, still in the Talmud, lots of Talmud. Should you help one group of people before another group of people? Which I think is a good question here. And it says, one does not protest against poor non-Jews who come to take gleanings, forgotten sheaves, and the produce in the corner of the field, which is given to the poor, pe'ah, talking about pe'ah and leket. Although they are meant exclusively for the Jewish poor, they really are intended for our own. On account of the ways of peace. So if poor non-Jews come to your fields to take, what's yours, even though you leave it, you're not supposed to take the corners, you're not supposed to take what falls out as you're gathering, things fall out, you're supposed to leave it for the Jews, fine. But if poor non-Jews come, you let them come. And the sages taught in Baraita, one sustains poor non-Jews along with poor Jews. And one visits the sick non-Jews along with the sick Jews, and one buries dead non-Jews along with dead Jews. So our own rabbis in the Talmud saying that what you have is so great. And we know that when you have extra, as you're gathering your harvest, and you can draw the analogy to whatever point in life you're at, whatever you're doing, you always have extra left over, you let that go to other Jews, and the rabbis in the Talmud saying, actually let it go to anybody who needs it. Because if there are poor non-Jews who need help, you help them. And they extend that to, like, if we're sustaining poor Jews, we're sustaining poor non-Jews. If we are visiting poor non-Jews, we are visiting non-Jews who are sick. We are visiting Bikur Halim. We are visiting Jews who are sick. We are visiting non-Jews who are sick. About burying that is a big mitzvah in Judaism, the biggest, the greatest you can actually ever do. We bury dead Jews, but we also have to help bury non-Jews. So we are supposed to give tzedakah and help others with all that we have, because we are obligated to give minimum 10%, maximum 20%. There are also rabbis who say that you never become poor helping other people, so don't ever feel penned in by the 20% thing. That opinion also exists. And you help you help your own, and we also help everybody else. Why? Because that brings shalom, that brings peace to the world. And that's really what we're supposed to do in the world, is bring peace to it. That's our job. And I think this is the last one, right? Last one? Yeah. So now I'm doing good on time. And I just had to fast forward a heck of a lot to the 12th century, to Mishnah Torah. This is the Rambam. It's brilliant in most things. Says we must be especially careful to observe the mitzvah of tzedakah, more so than any other positive mitzvah, for tzedakah is a sign of the righteous lineage of Abraham our father, as it is said, for that I've singled him out that he may instruct his children, his posterity, to keep the ways of God by doing what is just, i.e. giving tzedakah. The throne of Israel is established, and the religion of truth stands only on tzedakah, as it is said, quoting Isaiah, you shall be established through the righteousness, which is tzedek. So he's going to join you're established through righteousness, which is tzedek, tzedakah, they are related. This is our lineage, Rambam is pointing out. And you have to be very scrupulous in keeping this particular mitzvah, the mitzvah of tzedakah, more so than any other positive commandments, not like the do not murder, the do not, those are negative, positive commandments, more so than any other positive commandment. With your wealth, what are you supposed to do? You have to be scrupulous in giving it to those who need it, because that is how we bring righteousness to the earth. And as a Jew, you are supposed to be a righteous person. That is your inheritance. Your inheritance is Torah and the need to be a righteous person. And if it doesn't come down to helping other people, then maybe you've missed the point. So, in summation, with 3 minutes left to go, because I cut out a story. I hope what you picked up from this is that the Jewish view on wealth is not as easy or straight or kind of drawn out as it's good or it's bad. It's what you do with it. And that you are blessed with the ability to have wealth and to take care of yourself and your family, which you should do, but also having these things, because wealth is Daniel say transient. It comes and it goes. Your job is to make sure it goes to where it needs to go. Your family, yes, of course, and Jews, yes, of course, and non-Jews, because that's what brings righteousness to the world. Money can be used for bad things. Wealth can be used for bad things. Wealth can be used for good things. Ultimately, I think what the rabbis are teaching and what the Torah teaches even is that money, wealth itself inherently is not positive or negative. People can do good, people can do bad. Money can help you do either of those things. What you should try to do is to do good with it. Same with wealth, money, wealth, riches, etc. Boom, 2 minutes to go. Oh, okay, questions, comments, thoughts, counter sermons. I'm sorry that the slides look terrible because Canva hates me today. I'm sorry. Daniel, yes.
Second paragraph of the Amida says, if you do this, you're going to get all this good stuff. There's one little short line that I just love.
Yeah.
It says, and you will be satisfied. It's not the gathering of wealth. It might not even be what you do with it versus what somebody else does with it. But whatever you're blessed with, if it satisfies you and you're great, it makes you grateful, then you're successful. I just find that to be, I was taught that very early in my life by a wonderful rabbi, and every time I read it, I like it. So what you're saying and what you've done tonight has reinforced that for me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I mean, this happened literally. Jennifer, has it ever happened that I've not taught something and said, wow, this really needs to be a 3-part series? It's happened every single time. This is
Every
hard
time.
for me. Every single time. Every time. But yeah, there's so much in our tefillah, in the Amidah. It comes up in Havdalah. It comes up in Birkat Hamazon, kind of grace after meals, praying after meals. That you shall be eat and be satisfied. that comes up. You see that language come up a lot. And in Havdalah, it says, we want to be successful in what we have, not necessarily so you have more than you need, but you should be satisfied with what you have. And I suppose if you have more than what you need, that's the cue to start letting it move through the world.
Thank you for the lesson.
Thank you very much. It's 8 p.m. You're free to go. Don't worry. You can stick around and chat. You can not stick around and chat. It's whatever. I stay up far too late. My mom's on this call, so she's gonna probably yell at me later. She'll text me. Why are you staying up till 2 a.m.? I don't know. I can't sleep. But thank you for coming. I don't know. Am I teaching next month, Jennifer? What do I do?
No, we're taking a break until the fall.
Oh,
But we are
dang,
going to keep
okay.
having both Rabbi Fort and Rabbi Morgan are going to do a monthly evening program, and we'll keep it on Zoom so that everybody will be able to join from wherever you're joining from. So that's been a big success, something we've really enjoyed during our COVID time, and we're going to keep that for our next program year.
Yeah. Whose dog is that? I'm so excited. I love hearing the dogs. Is that yours, Jennifer?
That's my child. It's not a dog. It's my child.
Well,
My kids are wrestling in the other room.
my kid is, I don't know if he's asleep. What time is it? 8? He might be asleep. I keep his monitor set up, but so I can see it, but you can't see it. It's right over there.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you for coming. Sure, I'll see you next time. Or at Shul. I don't know.
Okay.
Especially vaccinated folks. We love